Hey everybody, this week I wanted to talk about globalization and organizational strategy. This is part of an 8-week discussion for MBA 595 at Elizabethtown College. To support our conversation around globalization, I'm leaning on the article Organizational Culture in the Age of Globalization by Emanuel Mascalu at the University of Sibiu, Romania. This article was written in 2014 for the Nicolae Belescu Land Forces Academy, which is a NATO-affiliated land forces academy in Romania. As we'll dive into, globalization closely interweaves political entities, private enterprise, and the ideas of nationhood and a global citizenship. With that being said, what is globalization and how do we define it? I personally think British sociologist Anthony Giddens' definition is the most applicable to our discussion for today, and that is globalization can be defined as the intensification of worldwide social relations which link to such an extent remote places that events occur locally are viewed through the prism of similar others spent many miles away and vice versa. To augment that, George Soros in his work on globalization gives a definition of globalization is the free movement of capital accompanied by the growing dominance of global financial markets and multinational corporations on national economies. With those two definitions in mind, we're going to explore the triggers of globalization as well as the tenets of globalization in practice. It's important to keep in mind that international trade is not a new phenomenon. Globalization is a different way of thinking about international trade that discards a lot of the antiquated notions of mercantilism and nation states. Rather, globalization embraces the idea of corporations operating globally, unrestrained by national boundaries and movements of people and goods. Our current understanding of globalization is underpinned by three main triggers: technological, political, and economic. Fundamentally, the technological trigger really allows for the majority of what we know as today's globalized marketplace. Communication in real time across the globe would have been unheard of even 50 years ago, yet it is a staple of the modern multinational corporation. From a political standpoint, modern globalization is underpinned by a confluence of around 100 years of collaboration between nations following major world wars. The last major trigger is economic in nature. The profitability of multinational corporations and the added wealth it provides to the global community help trigger further globalization. So knowing the triggers of globalization as well as defining it, we want to dive into the tenets of globalization. And these are increasing global interdependence, the liberalization of markets, internationalization of trade and production, and the free movement of capital, information, people, and goods. Some later stage tenets of globalization include the Third Industrial Revolution, which is that fundamental economic change occurs when new communication technologies converge with new energy regimes, mainly renewable energy, increased global competition, the dominance of multinational companies, and the birth of a global civil society. I couldn't help but be a little tongue-in-cheek here and use Georgia Guidestones as my photo for a civil society. In practice, it's a lot more benign. With these tenets, it's important to consider the culture of the organization and how it'll be able to globalize successfully and navigate a globalized marketplace. After all, organizations are comprised of people. Since we've already talked about the impact of culture in an organization on strategic decision making, it should come as no surprise that culture is also an incredibly important consideration when discussing globalization. One of the first considerations for an organization would be differentiation versus integration. And this calls into question the extent to which organizational culture is able to overcome national and cultural differences to create a global organization. The next cultural consideration would be the idea of control versus autonomy. This can manifest in a few ways. Firstly, a company based, for example, in the United States could have operations all across the globe in China, South America, Europe. There may be slight cultural differences when it comes to the understanding of individuality in these different nations. A global company will have to decide from a strategic standpoint how much control or autonomy to provide to each of its different globalized divisions. The last cultural consideration presented in the paper is national versus corporation. It's the idea of to what identity does an individual working for a company belong? Are they a citizen of their country first and an employee of the corporation second? Are they a global citizen not beholden to national interests? The idea of a global citizen is really in the eye of the beholder. Certainly, nationalism has taken a back seat as being a major driving geopolitical force, considering that it really reshaped Europe and much of the 19th century, but does remain a prevalent global force. At the same time, never before have we seen such powerful global corporations that are not beholden to national entities. Though companies like the British East India Company have existed in the past that would rival the scale, for example, Apple, the fundamental underlying principles of corporations beholden to shareholders versus national entities with vested interests across the globe make our current globalized marketplace much different in analysis. That brings us to today. Previously unforeseen challenges, such as global pandemics, threaten some of the major tenets of globalism and some of the major advantages. Never before have pathogens been able to cross the world with such speed, impose such challenges to different countries. In response to COVID-19, many countries have closed the borders and stifled trade between other nations, and there's been a return to some more protectionist policies even predating COVID-19. However, this is likely going to be temporary as a globalized marketplace facilitated by technology, political, and economic triggers will continue to drive globalization. As a result, it's important for modern business leaders to understand globalization and how it applies to their own organization. Even in grad school, we're working in a globalized setting in our simulation Micromatic. In teams, we're selling and producing in 3 different regions and making decisions in 3 different currencies. This is an important skill to have as we leave grad school and enter into the globalized business marketplace. Looking ahead, the world looks like it's only going to get more interconnected, and the value of collaborations across nations will be of paramount importance. As a result, business leaders need to take into consideration the implications of globalization and keep an eye out for cultural factors that may inhibit successful globalization practices, as well as being attuned to the needs of their own organization. Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. There's so much more to talk about in the ongoing dialogue around globalizations and organizational strategy. I'd love to hear your feedback and comments as we continue the dialogue. Thank you for your time.